Shall we get started?
Yeah, I think so. Just a heads up, whoever's on the right next to Deborah, we can see your phone. All right.
All the panelists are in the shop, by the way.
What are you looking at?
All right. Maybe Emily.
Let's just text messages.
Okay.
You want us to angle it, Bethany?
You're gonna block out Emily, so you'll have to. Emily will shift over.
How many years did I try to avoid this?
Perfect.
All right, great. So, hey everyone, we're going to get started with the meeting. Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Nick Ducharme. I'm the Vice President of the Florida chapter of the Society for Technical Communication, and I'm also your primary moderator this evening. Bethany.
Hi, I am Bethany Aguad. I am the STC Florida chapter president, and it's very eerie to see myself behind our panelists, so I'll try not to get too distracted by that. Thank you for everyone who's joining us in person and on the phone or on PC. We're all here on our webcams. For those who are on the phone, if you are not a panelist, if you could mute yourself during the actual panel part, that would be great. I know there'll be time for questions later. That way we don't have any background noise. So, can everyone hear okay at this point?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so if you guys could put yourselves on mute, that'd be great. I don't want to have to. I can also go and mute you if needed, but I think we'll just keep it that way. So thank you all for joining for our first sort of mixed medium panel with our panelists face to face and also our two panelists here on the phone. I know we'll be doing introductions shortly, but I'm glad you're all here for our monthly chapter meeting. We have these programs every month, so we hope you will join us in the future as well. And welcome to the STC Florida chapter meeting. So otherwise, I'm just going to be here just sort of moderating on the call. If you have any issues or questions, put them in the chat and I will answer them.
Quick plug about us as a chapter before we begin. Since 1977, our chapters provided technical communication meetings to our local communities. These programs have always been about promoting best practices, facilitating networking, and also sharing educational resources. That said, we've also changed and grown a lot as the profession has over the years. It's actually pretty recent that we became the Florida chapter as we're known today. Prior to this, we were the Orlando Central Florida chapter, and before that, the Orlando chapter. So naturally, with that wider service area, we're really trying to double down on our support of virtual participation and virtual attendance this year, being in support of that. We've made it our mission, and tonight is no exception, as you mentioned, Bethany. While we're no stranger to panel discussions, this is our first time inviting virtual panelists to join in on the fun. So without further ado, let's begin our panel about how to make subject matter experts, SMEs for short, your TechCom allies. I'll begin with some prepared questions, and then we'll switch to audience Q&A around 8 o'clock. Starting with our panelists in the room here, please state your name, your company and title, or most recent company and title, if retired, etc., and affiliation with STC, if any, and then after in the room, we'll do virtual panelists as well. Emily?
Long side, man. Hi, my name is Emily Wells. I work at Lockheed Martin. I am a technical writer. And I am the newsletter editor and communications chair for our chapter.
Hi, I'm Dan Voss. I worked at Lockheed Martin for 38.5 years, attempted to retire 3 years ago, and spent most of the next 2 years working as a consultant. This year, I have actually been retired. As far as I don't have any offices in the chapter, I retired as education committee chair, but I'm still kind of a rabble-rouser and I'm an STC fellow. I'm W.C. Weiss. Like Dan, I'm also an STC fellow. Currently the treasurer for the Florida chapter. I'm retired from Lockheed Martin after 45 years, and about 40 joined at the hip with this guy.
My name is Deborah Johnson. I am recently the victim of a merger, so I'm not with any company right now. I was the documentation manager and content strategist for Central Square Technologies up until about a month ago. I have been the president, vice president, media past president, and now I'm the director at large for the Florida chapter.
Holy, that's true to go.
I'm avoiding pressure.
now for our online panelists.
Yeah, Tina, you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Tina Kister. I worked at Lockheed Martin for 6 months on contract.
There's a thread here.
My most recent specialization area has been proposal writing, and I've done that in healthcare for about on and off for 4 years. Also the victim of a recent merger. So I'm currently focusing on publishing and doing presentations. And I've been an STC member for about 5 years.
All right, thanks, Tina. Beth Ann?
Hi, I'm Beth Ann Carr, and I work for myself, Carr Communications, with a small company with my husband. And I've been a member of STC for about 20-some years. I don't know exactly, but I worked in technical documentation for about 9 years, and for the last year since a couple decades, I've been doing more technical marketing materials.
All right, thanks, Beth Ann.
So, I have some prepared questions before we then later move on to audience Q&A. I figure we'll mix up the order in which people answer questions just to make it balanced and fun and all that.
Can I ask you questions too?
I reserve the right not to answer them, but yes.
Right. I will answer your questions, Nick. Unlike these two troublemakers over here.
So the first question I've got, and thank you, Emily. Would you like to go first or last? You may take the choice then.
I'll go first.
All right.
Get it over with.
So, let's see. When I was studying to become a technical communicator, I just heard all these horror stories about SMEs, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so intimidated. And of course, hearing how intelligent and just knowledgeable about their products that they work with, it's like, the first question I wanted to ask was, how do you deal with that just visceral sense of intimidation, the intimidation factor?
I don't think I was ever truly intimidated. Well, not just because of my listening personality, but also my father was a SME. He recently retired from Harris, 30 plus years. I lost track of the number as well. And so my entire life growing up was me hearing him talk about work, and I'd be like, hey, I don't understand this simple math problem, and he'd give me an explanation, and it would be like, you realize this is 5th grade math, not like calculus and college level, like, so I just always was used to it, him being like, I learned very quickly, don't ask Dad for help with math or science, because he didn't quite understand how to get it down to, I am not a math and science person, how do we make this work? So I just was always used to it growing up, so I guess I just kind of approached it in the aspect of like, hey, it's like talking to my dad, except now I actually kind of understand what he talks about. So I never really had that, but
okay.
It's unique.
Background does play a role, for sure. Dan?
Oh, you want us all to address the question?
Yes.
Okay. Look at my crib sheet here. I would say to avoid being intimidated, win their trust. And the way you do that is to respect their expertise, not fear it, but genuinely respect it. See, there you go. Show genuine interest in the area of expertise. That is absolutely huge. I don't think I've ever met an engineer in my 40 years out there that didn't end up liking to talk about what he or she did.
My friend.
And you do that by asking lots of questions, which is also important relative to another issue that is not germane to this question. But overall, win their trust.
Okay. WC?
For the most part, the age makes a difference also.
It does.
Dan and I share a common experience of being involved with proposal management for probably about 30 years at least. But for example, among the authors that we would work with, if they were, shall we say, more mature, They were generally pretty easy to get along with. Somehow a little hard to access sometimes, but as Dan said, interest in sharing pride in their accomplishments goes a long way. On the other hand, the younger group, not to call out anybody here, but Lockheed Martin, for example, if you're currently employed as a Lockheed Martin engineer, that means probably there were at least 10, if not 100, that didn't get your job. So to a large degree, the younger employees, and this not just now, but almost always, are kind of like a bunch of princesses. So they need a little care and feeding, a little special extra attention. And that doesn't necessarily say that they're ready for their job, but they think they're pretty good stuff as a result. And so keeping it light is a good part of it. As Dan mentioned, asking questions. That's a good way to show that, A, you speak the language, you're not going to screw their work up. But also keeping it on the humorous side if you can. One of my favorite phrases was always, you guys have any idea how hard it is to make you look good? And so let me cap it off by saying, in all of these transactions, as an editor, as a writer, it's not about you, it's about them. The fact that you have a deadline, the fact that you have problems, they've made your life difficult, that will get you nowhere. You might as well just throw that out of your discussion. It's all about making them feel comfortable and ultimately building a loyalty where they will respond when needed.
Good answer. Deborah.
I'm going to kind of piggyback on what you said, but also is that in my experience, a lot of the SMEs were younger than I was, or the same age. And it's more of becoming more of like a colleague where they they know what you do, but they don't want anything to do with it. And if they feel like it's a waste of time, that I got stuff to do, I don't want to say. So if you can I was always like, I want to make your job as easy as possible. I don't need all the background of everything. I just need you to answer my questions. And listening is the key thing, is listening to them and helping them understand that I don't need theory, I don't need the background, I just need you to say, is this correct, is this not correct, am I saying this correctly? And it helps them, and they gain a little bit more respect if you're not there to just sit there and make them talk to you for years and years, about stuff. So, I mean, in my instance, it was listening first, establishing a rapport, like you said, and making them feel like, look, I don't want to interfere as much as possible with your doing your work, but I need to get the answers. So that's fun.
So I have a question or an observation. I want to see if you all agree. Being introduced to this meeting by your teammate that's been there a while, or it's a new project, might help a person overcome that fear of going up to somebody with that expertise, because sometimes that could be a blocker. And would you also agree that explaining what your requirements are to help them build that rapport so they can answer the question in regard to your requirement?
So that is a really good question. I should make a note that we're mostly saving the Q&A for the end.
Oh, okay.
But please hold on.
Wasn't really a Q&A or an observation. I just want to see if they agree.
Would agree. Join the panel. The implied endorsement. It was welcome.
I've been doing this a long time.
Moving on to our online panelists for the same question.
Yeah. So Tina, I know you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think that everyone's touched on what I think is most important. If I just had one piece of advice, it would be along the lines of what's already been said, that you need to be genuinely curious and interested. I actually heard this quote today while I was listening to a fictional book, and I thought, it's so perfect. And the quote is, experts love their subjects. Show them interest, show them fascination, and they see themselves reflected, and then they will move the world for you.
Great.
Absolutely.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's the most poetic quote I've ever heard about subject matter experts.
I know.
Have you heard several non-poetic ones?
Well, I think I did yesterday. So Beth Ann, did you have any additional thoughts?
Well, I can't beat that. You know, I don't have a quote, but one thing is that's worked for me is being on the development team from the beginning, where you're looked on as a critical part of the product. And that is sort of happenstance with the job. I mean, in addition to what everybody else has said, if you're actually part of a development team, you're considered critical for the release. And I guess if that's important to you, that could be part of your job criteria, is find out where the technical writer position fits in on a team too. And then you're equal to a subject matter expert, you just have different roles.
Kind of like we're a SME in and of ourselves.
Very much so.
Good answers all around.
That's what my team calls me. He's like, you're the documentation specialist expert. And I'm like, just looking at him like, that's because you don't want to write this and you want to steal my work when I'm done. He's like, yes.
Hey, I already get that.
Okay.
All right, we're going to go in reverse order for our second question. So I think we touched on this a little bit in our answers here to this, but I feel like this is probably a pretty common experience about, you know, you're doing your job, and sometimes that involves making suggestions or comments on the existing writing done by the SME, and maybe perhaps SMEs even get a little defensive about their writing. How do you deal with that kind of situation? Starting with you, Beth Ann.
Well, I think this might depend on the size of the company to some degree, because if it's a larger company, you're going to at least be able to count on the fact that, well, you're trying to fit into existing documentation styles for the company, or the Chicago Manual of Style, or existing companies, you know, style guides, and that's it's not a criticism of the writer. I find that writers are hypersensitive as much as a subject matter expert is, because I was an editor of 50 people. So while editing 50 people, egos were in their way too, and I don't think it's that much different from a subject matter expert. Sometimes what I would say, if they wrote something and I misinterpreted it, I would say in advance, if I commented and made something wrong, please let me know, because it might just indicate that I don't fully understand the subject, not that we need to improve those areas. I may have gotten it wrong. So sort of disarming them with a little bit of humility up front as well, that I can't know everything either.
That's really good. I think I've used that in my time for sure. Tina.
Like Beth Ann said, it's absolutely critical that you have some sort of standards. And it's not so you can say these are the rules and you have to follow them. It's so you can redirect the energy away from the two personalities and back onto the work, so that if you're just comparing the work to the standards, now it's not about whether or not you're a good person or a good writer. It's just whether or not it meets the criteria. And that being said, I think one of the things that I've seen that causes a lot of unnecessary conflict is when writers are almost experts but not quite, and they don't really understand that language is flexible. For example, my last boss would go ballistic if somebody used the word over instead of more than. But over is accepted usage. You know, it's okay, it's proper. Now, it may sound weird to us because we haven't heard it. So when you come across things like that, you really have to be flexible and let it go. If it's not, you know, if it's not critical and it's not incorrect, let it go. You don't want to expend your sort of capital you have in terms of trust and rapport on silly things that don't matter.
Agreed, 100%. Never.
To follow up what Tina said, it's the same thing. If you establish kind of a little bit of a rapport with the SME and you get to know them and you say, look, I just want to make sure that I'm reflecting what is accurate. So is what I've written correct? Did I say this correctly? Because they know that we're trying to follow some kind of standards. We're trying to make it the best that we can. And when I'm asking them, does this sound right? Is this correct? Is this what you're trying to say? Or those types of things, because I need your help. We're us working together. So as a partnership. So it smooths it out a little bit, just, you know, where you're not sitting there saying, well, I can use it. And like she said, you have to be flexible. Sometimes there's just people that will say, no, you have to say this. And unless it's a glaring, you know, something that you cannot use, it's, you just have to be flexible. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
As previous speakers have said, and I have to agree, you know, you can't come into that discussion saying that you're not going to be moved. You really have to show some flexibility to be open to their concerns, so that it's not contentious. You can work through them, and if it's small stuff, fine. And maybe I'm still a little dance thunder here. The problem on new business proposals is you've got engineers who are very, very good describers who think linear thoughts. So you get a chronological presentation or an if-then kind of a stream. You know, had breakfast, and then went downstairs, then blah, 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 got changed up with the whatever. Whereas in our case, we're trying to build up evidence to prove assertions in a new business proposal, plus worse, it's likely page limited. So while you've given me a wonderful textbook worth about 10 pages in a textbook, I really need about 2 pages that are a little bit harder hitting and willing to move a little bit farther in terms of its claims. So I'm more convincing. That's true. We have the ability to expand on the truth more than they do. And so for that reason, my job is a little bit different than theirs, and they should recognize their work in it, except that they might not. I can't also afford to spend my whole life arguing with anybody. So that's where, you know, the things that are big, you try to hang on to. The things that are small, you kind of accept that that's acceptable. Over time, you keep trying to work to a working relationship where our next meeting is more successful and doesn't take as long.
A couple things I'd like to point out following up with WC, and I guess it was also Tina, the don't sweat the small stuff. One of my pet peeves is people who do not hyphenate unit modifiers. And we were in the final,
Twice like that.
had this problem all my life. We had this final review of a document for a proposal worth $8 billion, and we read it line for line, okay? And there were 6 people on it. I was one of them, and one of them was their logistics engineer, and she's brilliant, but she did not like hyphens, and therefore she did not use them. In fact, she thought they were evil. And we were about to come to blows, and suddenly I realized, this is not worth it. We had to sit in a room for 12 hours a day for 4 days to read the entire proposal. I said, this is not worth it. And for me, I mean, those of you who know me, that's huge. I mean, I let something go. You know? And I even let her take the hyphen out of high value. But anyhow, now, to Beth Ann's point, you hit it right on the button in terms of establishing yourself with an SME. It is to strike the right balance of humility, same word you used, and assertiveness. And what you do is you acknowledge the SME, you said this, that you acknowledge your SME's expertise on the subject, and especially your total lack of sane. You openly acknowledge that. You can even use a little humor, but I got no idea what you're talking about. But then on the same token, you establish that you do have subject matter expertise in writing and editing. And so I've told engineers, like, I've been with this company 40 years. It helps when you're old, I guess, a little bit. But I said, and I know a little bit about every discipline in this company, just enough to be really dangerous. and humor, you know. And basically I say, but I can't help you if you don't tell me where I'm wrong. And again, that's back to what Beth Ann said. So be a team player, learn about the process, product or service. Oh, and don't edit just to edit, changing 6 to half a dozen, something like that. And be very, very careful not to change technical meaning when editing. One of the most hideous experiences, I was with the company less than 6 months, and SME engineer was running in, his hair is on fire, and he's waving, this was back in the days of typing and writing and blue pencils and stuff, no computers or anything, and he's waving this crumpled piece of paper, he changed my meaning, he changed my meaning. So, oh my God, I'm going to be fired. Tom Curran. CP.
Yeah, great stories there, Dan.
My boss, he basically takes the paper, glasses down on his nose and says, well, Joe, Dan could not have changed your meaning because as you wrote it, it has no meaning. Yes! But he didn't get it right either, so I suggest you guys work together. You're both wrong.
Emily?
That's what So, everyone just raised really good points to this, and I just think my thing with it is, I haven't had a lot, I've had the, I don't know if fortune's quite the right word, but chance to work on projects that have no documentation existing, but just have a bunch of people who know things for the past 20 years, and surprise, we now have to write it all down. So I guess that experience with that is kind of interesting the way I've worked with it. I only had one SME who I've actually had to take his existing work and then change it into something else. And it's funny because now my entire team is like, you're the SME on this subject now. And I'm like, well, crap. So they're like, hey, this needs to change. Here you go. And I'm like, I've changed this thing 6 times, guys. Like, really? Stop adding to it. And I think the biggest thing there was just humor with us. And it's really funny because I got the one SME who actually is like really good at writing. So we turned it into a bit of a game where we purposely try to find editorial mistakes in each other's work. And so we would just back and forth fight that. And have had conversations with him where he'll come by my desk and leave English jokes on my whiteboard.
Cool.
Yeah, back and forth with that. So I found that way made it a lot easier because when we kind of approached it that way, we weren't doing like, oh hey, I'm going to purposely like find your mistakes because you're a horrible writer, but it was fun to kind of be like, hey, let's just both kind of like do this so it's our thing, that it works for us, and I think it makes it a lot easier when you're very laid back like that because it made it much easier for us to react, and when he's like, oh, this is what it is, he said it one way, and I had the customer review it, and they were like, we have no idea what this means, and we're like, you got to go tell him to fix it. And so I'll have to go to him and be like, hey, so kind of playing a dumb blonde moment a bit there to be like, hey, so this is kind of what you meant, right? Like, I'm not 100% sure. And it made it easier, I think, on him because, like, it's not me being like, this is super insanely complicated, no one but you would understand this, but it's more me being like, hey, you know, like, this makes sense, but, like, we've got to kind of make it a little easier, a little, you know, to kind of approach it in a more laid-back attitude made it a lot easier because I feel like, especially at Lockheed, it's so high energy and so high stress sometimes because it's like engineers are fooled. You know, the engineers are fooled so many different ways, especially lately. Well, especially lately now, these two have left, no. But also especially, well, they've hired 15...
amongst the panelists.
Well, I'd say, put it this way, they've hired 1,500 people in 6 months.
Wow.
We're insanely expanding, it's insanely stressful, and so I think a lot of engineers are now feeling that because I've got engineers pulled to so many different projects and they're like, literally, I have 40 hours, guys. And I have engineers who, they're working 20 hours overtime a week, and that's normal. So being more laid back and making it funny and making it not as stressful as their jobs usually are, I think has made it a lot easier because it is so high stress now, especially because we are a very high-performing company, which is great. But it's also very stressful.
Nick, can I add one thing? Emily flipped the switch. And this is a funny story from one of the early years that I was working there. We were working a lot more technical reports at the time. And one engineer, Glenn Brosh, always had a deal with another engineer, whose name I forget, that he would write a word into his input and then bet that it would be there after the edit was done. And sometimes he won, sometimes he didn't. But the point of all that, English joke, and Dan has run into any number of those things where wordplay is very, very important to share that. But somehow, Glenn made it a team sport. He's an SME, but the fact that the process was also a game. We were gamifying, 30, 40 years ago, the whole process of technical writing.
That's cool. Very cool. So, a lot of great stories to that question. Woo! We're gonna switch gears a bit. So, Tina, I was thinking we could start with you on this one. I'm curious about how different panelists here have approached formalizing the review and discussion processes to take some of the randomness out of the equation, to make it a little more predictable and less maybe nerve-wracking, for instance.
That's a very good question, because I think a lot of people miss an opportunity to sort of formalize processes. And when I say formalize, I don't mean focus on the process itself. I mean to expend some effort to clarify expectations. And I think a lot of times, we know what the right thing to do is, and we know what schedules are like, but our subject matter experts don't always know. And I've worked with a lot of colleagues who expressed almost kind of a contempt or a disdain when a subject matter expert didn't know that, that doesn't modify this, or of course we need 3 days to print the proposal before we mail it. And I think you can get around that by write stuff down. When I worked on proposals, I would start every project by sending out a detailed calendar. And I would just do a screenshot of the little Microsoft calendar and circle dates, working back from the deadline, and say, just because it's due on the 25th, that's not your deadline. Your deadline is the 18th. Because they didn't know. They actually didn't know. And to assume that they should know would lead to a lot of confusion and a lot of frustration. And then another component of that is formalizing feedback, so that, in 2 jobs I've had, I've stepped into situations where there was a lot of existing animosity between the documentation team and the subject matter experts. And oh my gosh, is that a difficult situation. Sure. And one of the things I did really successfully to sort of untangle that web of history was to just put together a 6-question survey on SurveyMonkey that was free and anonymous, and then, type it up into 1 page. Here's the results, and therefore, here's what we're going to do about it. And by formalizing it, it really made them feel like they had a voice, and like we cared about the process itself and making improvements to our own performance as well as to the documentation.
And question to you, Beth Ann.
It's interesting because I've always felt pretty good kinship with the subject matter expert when I've worked with them, because I felt like we were on the same team. We're the people that are actually closest to the users of the product in some ways. The one person from the expertise and then me from delivering something that they have to deal with to use the product, whatever it is. And so by thinking of myself on the team of the subject matter expert, I think I try to put myself in their shoes as well. And just that attitude, I've had more trouble with writers on a team than with subject matter experts, just by having a good attitude, honestly. And I think that your attitude does break down a lot of walls. I guess I'm not easily intimidated by people and their expertise, because one of my first working experiences was working on the Supreme Court as a messenger, and I would talk to justices all day. So after spending time talking with them, I realized that nobody else was going to be as smart as they were ever. So that actually robbed me of a lot of intimidation factor in my career. But as much as you can be on the same team, with your subject matter expert and let them know that you're on the user's side and they are too. I think that really helps.
Great answers on the phone. Moving to the table, let's go Emily.
All right. So I think for my review processes, that's definitely something my team is working on all the time. Is there a better way to do this? Is there an easier way to do this? And I think Tina really hit it on the head by giving them an idea of your schedule, because I'm working on a software project right now, and it's a bit notorious for the pushing deadlines and respinning software. Software's constantly changing. And part of the confusion we had with the engineering side was they're like, well, we're delivering this date. Like, are you not delivering your book? Like, they were under the assumption we're delivering hand in hand together. And it's like, no, this is what we're delivering to. This is why for and so being able to sit down with the engineer and explain that and be like, this is why I can't wait. Like, I contractually cannot do that, made it a lot easier to be like, oh, now I understand why you've been nagging me for the past 2 weeks, like, hey, I really, really, really need to sit down and do this. And it makes it a lot easier when it's like, here's my very detailed, here's what I need, here's why. And I think the why is the most important that I've run into, because, I mean, people tell you deadlines all the time. They're like, I need it by tomorrow, I need it by next week, I need it by next month, whatever it is. And I've found a lot of times if you have a why, and not like, oh, just because, but like, you know, you have a legitimate reason, like it's a contractual agreement, or because it takes 2 weeks for art to be done, or it takes this much time for this. I find it makes it a lot easier, because then it's not me as the writer putting deadlines on you and, like, you know, potentially building an antagonistic relationship. It's, we're here together because we're both screwed by these deadlines potentially, or we're both under the gun for them, so we're together under those deadlines, because it's not just me giving them to you, it's me saying, hey, I got these, I'm just the messenger here, don't get mad. And it's worked really well with my SMEs, because they're a lot more willing if I'm like, hey, no, this is what I'm working to. And by the way, I'm also working like 3 other things at the same time, so I totally get your business, and I really want the least amount of time to put into this if possible, but we still need to get the answers. And so I think coming to that level and being like, oh, okay, we're both under this schedule, it's not too, like, we both have separate schedules, but we have this shared one, and kind of building that up.
We all have challenges.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Dan?
Let me try to keep this really short, because the word process was used by one of the first 2 respondents. And we have a very well-defined process for proposals at Lockheed Martin. And as a writer-editor, you can help the situation you're addressing with this question by getting everybody to buy into the process. And one thing that you do is the proposal manager. That he or she is the boss for a proposal. I guess what would the project manager be that in the documentation? Somebody makes the ultimate decisions, right? Sure. So what you want done editorially, like you give him a style guide or her a style guide, and they buy in on it, and you may have to concede, you know, too many capital letters or something like that. But basically, then it goes on what we call a wall of truth. Literally, up on the wall, this is how you refer to the product. This is how you use it. And you don't write in the future tense, the missile will not fly. It flies. But we don't have a missile yet. That's not the problem. Anyhow, that's enough. But it's the process and getting buy-in to it before the conflicts happen.
WC?
Very, very fortunate in the work that I did at Lockheed, the larger projects like multi-volume proposals and this kind of thing. We had a professional planning department. And if you have anybody who does that, works the proposal or the document schedule, and it's not you, then make sure that they are your best friend. Because there are certain things that make our work a lot easier, like when reviews are scheduled. Scheduling on a Monday, for example, always made me crazy, because in those days we had to print. If you talk to engineers and you say, I need it on Thursday, you'll get it Friday. Why? Because they want to go home for the weekend, which gives you Saturday and Sunday in a perfect world to, without any kind of interruption, do a concentrated job of editing and writing. However, inevitably they'll want to travel review teams in to have them start Monday morning. So you've got to bring your print shop in on overtime, which costs extra. And then you cut your editing time in half. I always work with the planning staff to make sure we review it on Tuesdays. And so finding your friends is the first part of that formalized reviews process. It's not like the steps were different, but when you do the steps makes a difference. I also got in the habit, because I've been burned early, and then learned from it, to sit with the proposal manager or the project manager and give him an estimate of what our services were going to be. And it's like, if he buys into my scheduling effect, I can spend only this much. And then you start finding out what the assumptions are. What is it that they expected that cost them more?
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of that meeting, if they want to do it that way, it's harder, it costs more, but you can do it. But because money is usually tight, you have the leverage to influence. Let's do it my way. It costs less. I know what I'm doing, and I make you look better. So again, back to the comment I made a number of, I guess, months ago, that we're not really in the business of documentation. We're in the business of making other people successful. And once that's understood, heroes in engineering are made with the support of a good communicator, for example. Last thing is in reviews, I had gotten into, well, I think we basically all had, the habit of not putting all the books on the table at the same time. To keep the process going, it doesn't make sense for you to shut your team down and wait for people to read. I put a book into review. When I get it back, I put the next book into review. We keep it going that way. Don't shut yourself down, because there's a lot of work to do. And same way, you don't want to reward them for being slow. You want to give them an incentive to get to the next book.
And Deborah.
Well, I'm going to kind of go in a little different. In experience that I've had a number of years. The first half of my career, I was a consultant and a contractor, and I would go in, do my work, and come out. So you have to figure out what their process is, or what the best process is to get it done if you're only there for 3 or 4 months, right? And you have a deadline, you have this. So it's more of a partnership, and it's a little more relaxed in that way. Is that, hey, I need your help, let's work together. Then you worked in a place, I worked in a place like Cisco, okay? And they had a rigid review process, a rigid process for the SMEs that literally you had 20 SMEs that had to review your document. They had to sign off and hand it to the next person. That's how old school it was. But it had to go, and if you didn't get done by a certain day, the SME, if it was wrong, you were held, not me. They were held accountable for having incorrect information in the book. So they knew that there was repercussions, whether there was performance appraisals, whatever. They were held accountable for not doing it in a timely manner. So it never was really on my shoulders. Then you get to a place where it's automated, where you literally are working in a component content management system where you can literally type what you need reviewed, click change the status to review, and then they get an email. They go in, log in, review it, and you're done, which they love because it's easy, it's fast. So each place, that I've gone, you've had that. You have to adapt to that, to what they need done and how they need to do it. So you just kind of work it out. And as being a lead or a team lead for the last couple places, each team member in my last place, they handled their own process. They made their own relationships with their SMEs. They knew how to get what they needed and get it done quickly and make their deadline, and they made their deadline every time. So you just kind of, I guess, be a little bit flexible and understanding, but stick to your guns. And if they know you have their back and they've got yours, usually works out pretty good.
Let's see. It's 45 currently. I know we're planning on starting the audience Q&A around 8, so I would say we've got time for one more prepared question before we move on to it. And I definitely wanted to save this for close to the end, because I know that we've talked about a lot of the stressors that may be involved with SME life, right? But if everyone could just give a quick anecdote about maybe something that sticks out as like a really good, one of their best interactions with a SME throughout their career? Going in reverse order from the last question, starting with Deborah.
I don't know if it's the best anecdote, but it was the most eye-opening. I was at a place right around the time of 9/11 when the Twin Towers came down. And we were developing software. It was ad hoc software, so every time they did something, it was different. So the documentation had to change each and every time. And my SME, who knew everything about everything, was a product manager, left. And it was one of those things where he and I had such a great partnership, but the next person that took over that position was an engineer. And every time I sat down with him and had to get answers, I got the theory of evolution, the theory of this and the theory of this. And I finally sat there and I said, I just need you to tell me if this is correct or not. And because I have to change this stuff. He stood up in his cube and started yelling at me at the top of his lungs, just ranting and raving, and the vice president came out of his office and just said, in my office, now, so both of you. And he closed the door and said, I don't care what she asks you, what you do, you give her what she needs. She has a job to do, get it done. So it was more or less the support of the senior management that changed the whole dynamic. He apologized, and I never had a problem with him since. So that was my most memorable one.
So you've gotten along really well since then?
Since then, we did.
Okay, because we are ending on a positive note. All right.
It was. First, never spoke to him ever again. No, it was good.
Excellent.
It did good, yeah.
WP.
I didn't expect this one, but it did bring me a smile as I thought about things. Actually, there's two that I need to mention. And one aspect of the first one was the Martin Sports Car Club. The lesson there is it's more than just work. It can be work and play. It's getting to know people. Expand your job and your ownership of your role to meet people outside doing things. And I was an officer in the Martin Sports Car Club for about 25 years, which is primarily a company-based racing club. But through that, I got to know Marty Cooper, who became chief engineer of our company, fairly well. I got to watch him and his kids race against each other in a Spitfire for about 5 years, and this kind of thing. And so as a result, when Marty and I would end up on a project together, it was like we knew each other, we respected each other, and he was kind of like my big brother. And so as it turns out, in the last 15 years of my career, I worked with another former chief engineer, Keith Huddleston, and he was also very, very good. Back when times were lean, he'd have to put together a report. I mean, his name was on it, but I put together the report. And so we ended up working fairly well together. He retired in 2006, and we still exchange emails. It's just kind of a neat feeling when things go that good.
Like it's a friendship. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah?
I had a case with a dictatorial proposal manager that, old school all the way, all the profanity, the smoking. We have the way it used to be when men were men, and just
whoa,
whoa,
Yeah,
anyhow, and so we were trying to get a 22,000-page cost volume turned around in 3 weeks, and it was due January 2nd. So you know what happened to Christmas, right? Christmas. I canceled it that year. I literally did. I actually called the gal on the carpet for going out for lunch for an hour and bought a Christmas present. That's how ruthless I was. And I was kind compared to the proposal manager. And so, and I was on the finance team, even though I'm an editor, because they were the ones that had to produce all this data. And it was like hell to get them to follow the process, right? So I went to the tyrannical person and said, I'm going to need your help here. Because they're not cooperating with me, and I can't even get the typist to finish the typing, because what they did is they brought in temps to do all the typing. This is typewriters. This is back in '82, right? They brought in temps to do all the typing on IBM Selectrics, 2 shifts, 12 and 12, but they were all temps. the ones that needed to be typing it were the executive secretaries. At that point, it was mostly women, and they were all for like 90, 100 words a minute, and they understood what they were typing, right? So he called me in his office and says, how come we're not making the date? I said, no, we asked for typists who knew what they were doing, but the executives would not give up their secretaries. So we brought in these, inexperienced, borderline competent people. And he said, what do you need? I need every secretary on the executive row in 2 12-hour shifts for the next week, and send those temps to the vice presidents and the directors and all that. That's not something I probably could have pulled off. And he did it. We got it out, So that was the case of being pretty assertive. He could also tell me, see you.
Well, I think in that situation, I had that where something got pushed because engineering, and it was like, you have to be sometimes. You have to be assertive and be like, hey, I cannot do, I don't have answers. I did not get an engineering degree. I've not spent 10 years on this project, and this person has, and if I can't get that, I can't do it, But my experience still cracks people up when I tell them. So I've been at Lockheed 7 months. This is my first job after graduating. So this is like first real life, big world. So, I'm here, new project, and they're like, congratulations, we've been doing this for 20 years. No one ever wrote it down, but you have to now from scratch. And test engineering's evolved along with sustainment. So they're all doing different things, and they're disagreeing with each other. Here you go, have fun. And it's like, okay. And so I went and met my engineer, and I don't even know how we got onto it, but somehow we started talking Avengers and the Marvel movies, which if you don't know me, I can talk for hours on the Avenger movies and the theories, because I'm a very big Marvel fan. Superheroes, comics, in case anyone's not familiar. I forget people don't always know what I'm talking about. And we would just, every time we meet, because we have to see all the time, he was basically my only source of engineering, we would just kind of talk about the new movies. Black Panther had come out, we talked about that one. And then coming to May, Avengers Infinity War came out, which is like the giant culmination of 20-something movies, 10 years, crazy all this. And I am him, and I'm like, hey, can I come over and talk to you? I need to go poke around the station, do this, da, da, da. And he's like, sure, we can talk about Avengers.
Great.
I was like, okay. We went over there, and the whole time we're talking about Avengers. I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh yeah, Tony did this. So Iron Man was so cool. Hey, what's the connection like in between? We're back and forth, and one of his coworkers is sitting next to us, just watching us, and he looks at him, and he's like, I don't know whether to be impressed or kind of terrified, or both. And I was like, probably both. And it's so funny because I'd have you, my coworkers would be like, how do you get your engineer to talk to you so much? I'm like, oh, we talk Avengers every time we go over there. I'm like, I'm not like, we found our niche, that's our thing, and it's funny because he still IMs me every now and then, and I am, and he's like, so yeah, hey, you're gonna see the, when it's coming out, Captain Marvel. I'm like, oh yeah, and so, oh yeah, by the way, while we're at it, do you have that screenshot? He's like, oh yeah, sure, I'll bring it over to you. Like, personally came to my desk, handed it to me. like, personally made the walk over, and it's like, making that kind of connection there. Still to this day, like, he'll still talk to his bosses about me, and he's like, because now other writers work with him, and he would be like, oh yeah, how's Emily? And I have a coworker like, he still asks about you, and I was like, well, then I did something right.
Aw, that's warm and fuzzy.
Yeah,
that's good. Beth Ann.
I completely agree with finding something in common with the person you're talking with, developing some sort of rapport that has nothing to do with the job. I guess my very best long-term SME relationship was with an accountant, and I'm kind of allergic to business and finance, but I did take some classes, correspondence courses. They'd be online now from Penn State, just to develop an expertise myself in what the users need to know. And that went a long way gaining respect from the SME is just trying to actually go the extra mile in my own job, of understanding exactly what he was trying to say when he was using language I didn't quite understand. Taking courses in that area. Now Coursera is available and all sorts of free resources, and that whatever you want to learn is helpful. But we always talked about our families, because his family was about 7 years older than my family in terms of marriage, birthdays, kids, and it was funny. It's like, I'm trailing 7 years after you, no matter what I do, and it was just having something outside whatever project you're working on does make it more special.
And Tina.
That's funny, because my best SME experience was all about the work, which I really appreciated. I like it when people are able to focus on the work and really collaborate around a common goal. And I was working at a company really closely with everyone in top management, and I worked with the vice president of business strategy, who had been doing sales presentations for years. And within like 2 months, we had developed such a rapport that he wouldn't even try to write stuff down anymore. I would just go sit, across from him at his desk, and he would talk at me. And he really recognized that I was the subject matter expert when it came to communicating. And he was so relieved and grateful, and that I took this off his shoulders and was doing it so well. And that was the rightest I think I've ever felt in my work.
Some great stories from all 6 of you throughout, but especially the warm and fuzzy ones at the end are my personal favorite, I think. So at this point, I feel like we should move on to our audience Q&A. I see that there's been a lot of great back and forth going on in the chat. Maybe we could start from something from there?
Sure. We don't have a lot of questions in the chat. It's mostly discussion and us reacting to how awesome conference rooms are at Disney, apparently, because they're all Disney themed and have superhero names and cool stuff like that.
I saw Loki's room, and I was like, "That's mine."
Yeah, Celeste is trying to make Celeste is trying to make us all jealous, and it's working. But I know Alex had a question for Dan. Did you want to ask that, Alex?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Dan, can you tell us about the great management volume heist of 2011?
Oh my God. When do they close the building?
We're wrapping up at 8:30.
You talked about 10 minutes, stand up.
We had a former director at Lockheed Martin who came back as a consultant to review proposals. And he was a cocky little son of a... He used to be an Air Force pilot, and he had that Top Gun attitude and arrogant as hell. And that was a good match for me, right? So basically, he came back, and he was acting like he was still a director in the company, right? But he was working for us. He's a consultant to review our proposals, right? And so what he did is he didn't like the way we were laying out the management. I'm talking layout now, page design, right? And so he stole it. He electronically stole it and took it home with him, or he was working from home, and he locked us out of our own proposal. It was due in 2 days, and he started to redo it. And I went totally ballistic. I said, this is sabotage. You gotta make this guy let us back in. And even though he was, I guess retired and consultant, he was still so intimidating that the proposal manager wouldn't make him let us back in. So we had a very skillful IT person who got in the back door, kicked his ass out, and we changed everything back the way it was. And when he found that out, he went completely berserk. He said, "You run my layout." And I said, "That's not your job."
Ooh. That's intense. That's up to an 11 right there.
So did you make up and hold hands?
No. But he hasn't been asked back as a consultant. I mean, while they wouldn't really stand up to him, we were right. I mean, you know, no matter how important he used to be, he's working for us at about $250 an hour to review the proposal, not change it the way he wants it to be.
I see that Bethany is gathering for any questions here on the phone. While we're waiting on a response for that, perhaps if anyone in the room has something they want. Yes, David Coe, please.
I have a couple of things, actually. A couple of observations and one question. I'm going to do the observations first. One, I think WC already addressed this. SME time has to be allocated in your project schedule. You have to give them time. If you don't, you can very well run into your SME and say, "I don't have time to work with you, reviews or interactions or anything because I have my schedule to get my production done." So early on, you want to plan that, and you want to make sure to get billable hours, depending on how you run your project. The other thing is anecdote that you were talking about. I had two really good things. Once you win your trust of the SMEs that you work with, I had the lead engineer and the lead technician take me to a work site, and we spent 2 days working through every hardware and software to meet my requirements and walk me through and actually physically interact with that system. And they were very understanding. It was very nice and it was helpful. And from that point on, it was always good. And then you also start becoming a SME yourself. I think somebody already mentioned that as well. The other thing, if you have the capability to help out and you have the leeway in your hours to help with the installation and implementation, I know I'm an engineer, so I have a heads up on some people, but I also did installation and implementation and arranged with the engineers, which also built that trust of rapport. My question to you guys is that the company, one of the companies I'm working for right now, they have a mandatory review process, but not everybody has the tool set. And, and because of licensing and distribution and all that, but you have a deadline. They have their own deadline. How do you handle getting the interaction that you need from your SME when the tool set may be too challenging to work with or not available, and yet you have those rules that you got to follow?
From a while ago, it gets down to old school, where you literally might have to just print something out and take it over to them and then just incorporate it in. The biggest challenge with that is that what if you've got more than one SME that reviews it, if they disagree. And that's where the challenge would happen is that but we literally had to take our stuff to the person. They would have to review it and pass it along. So when I get it back, it had multiple colored pens, it had multiple, it was really awful. But that was the only way they could get it done. There was not the technology that they have today that you could literally just invite someone to a review. They open up a web page and just make their edits like they do in Word, and then you're done. And then you just move on, and you can have multiple reviews going on at the same time. So my difficulty was at that point in time, which you had talked about, and I literally went out with the engineers that used to install things for the broadband cable, just to watch them, just to see how that's how they do it, and come up with a different idea or a design. But the review process was really difficult back in those days because you literally had to walk it around to everything. And they only had so much time to review it.
We have gone over to an all-online proposal review process the last 5 or 6 years. Everybody can access the PDF and Adobe and make their changes. They can see what everybody else is making so that if they're disagreeing, they can fight it out during the review, not give you two conflicting sets of orders right before your deadline, you know. As far as I can't help you on the license thing. I mean, that would be a tough one. But what we do as far as complexity, this system is not that complex, but it does have its quirks. And the first thing that we do, literally, at the first proposal meeting, is have our IT person, the process expert, explain the review system and the process to them, and I'm talking hands-on. They sit on computers, shows them how to do it, and you facilitate during the actual review. You know, you don't let them sit there and struggle with something for 10 or 15 minutes. You know, you go help them. So, and they benefit from that because it's a much more efficient review than printing 20 copies of something and getting 20 different markups that don't agree, obviously. Yeah.
I think that's definitely a very big thing. I had it recently where one of my engineers, we do it all through PDFs now. You know, because like leave your comments on it, I can respond to your comments, you know, and we can sign it and grade, you know, so it makes it a lot easier. And it's nice because by being able to put it into that, fortunately now it's a very, like you can use Adobe, their cheaper, their reader for free, you know, comes with it, so it makes it a little easier because they don't necessarily, it's like, you know, the writers we need, you know, the pro fancy page work, we got to do all sorts of stuff. You don't really need that to read it and comment on it, you know, so it makes it a little easier. But I had one of my engineers who I've been asking him 3 weeks, 4 weeks to sign something. I was like, hey, I got, you know, I need you to sign this. And it took us sitting down for me to kind of to finally be like, hey, yeah, you know, can you sign this afterwards? Because I'm like, been trying for 4 weeks. And he's like, yeah, I don't know how to do that. And I was like, you couldn't have told me 4 weeks ago? And like, literally, I like pulled it open and we're sitting at my desk and like, you do this, click this, and that's how you do it. And just sitting and showing, he's like, that's it? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, you don't need me? I'm like, nope, I just need that. And he was like, oh, okay, I'll sign it tomorrow, or I'll sign it like once I get to my desk. And I was like, thank you. So sometimes just having that, like, just show it and be like, hey, I understand the technical differences.
Yeah, in a way you're reversing roles then. You're the SME in that particular process, and they're not. It's a good trade.
Any of our panelists on the line want to add anything on top of that?
What can I say?
In general, I think, you know, getting information out of subject matter experts is complicated. And working on proposals as I have for the last couple years, I actually got a bit of a pass on it because most of my, I would assign the lead salesperson as the person who had to review all the other subject matter experts' comments and consolidate them so I wouldn't get the conflicting instructions. And that worked because guess what? They got a $20,000 commission for meeting the deadline. But unfortunately, sometimes when all of your nuanced tactics fail, it does boil down to pulling in someone with a little more authority and hoping that you have, you know, enough support there or a solid enough process that, you know, sometimes all people need is a little nudge, but it does come down to that sometimes.
I think Tina made a good point there where good communication, I think, is just the biggest thing. And not just between you and your engineer, but also you and your upper management, you and others on your team. That's definitely something, one of my projects we've run into, and we've found that a lot of the difficulties we've had that are now being resolved is we finally got the right people involved in the conversation. We finally had those conversations with, you know, the right people among our team. And like once we had those conversations to be like, we could have made this easier like months ago. Like this didn't have to be this painful. We had just like figured out this was what the problem was we were on two slightly different levels that were just overlapping, and we just had to get on the same one. And I think that solves most of the problems, and even technological ones that can help overcome those.
So, do we have any questions in the chat?
No, but I think Beth Ann, if you don't mind sharing, Beth Ann, what you had in the chat about how to kind of deal with the different perspectives on the importance of logic and black and white for engineers.
Well, I was just saying as an observation, sometimes when you work with engineers, the world is very black and white. They don't have much gray area. It's not a universal truth, but it can be just in the nature of their business. They're more tending to that direction, more literal. their opinion of you, I find, has a lot to do with whether they think that everything you do is wrong or there may be just a few things you need to tweak. So the more you can improve that relationship with the person, the better everything will be. The interactions will be better. And I do have a quick anecdote that kind of illustrates things. I worked for a marketing documentation type thing where I was asked to interview a bunch of financial advisors, and these people are very money driven, and they don't seem interesting to other people. In general, their job is to help people, save money for retirement or whatever, but I had to make them interesting. And so I went in with a series of questions about what makes them tick. There was a book years ago called Everyone Has a Story, and I try to really keep that in mind as I meet people in everyday life, is that this person's life is equally interesting as anyone else's. And I tried to find that spot, and when I turned the work in, my boss said, "You made this guy interesting." I can't believe it. I've known him for years. I had no idea. And sometimes just creating a relationship makes every interaction better.
I love the insight that, at the end of the day, everyone's human.
Very true.
Okay. Well, so I don't have any other questions from the chat, but I have a question, and I think it's something we haven't really gotten at yet. I know I've had experiences working with subject matter experts who not only are, not here, they're remote, but they're also from a different cultural background. So whether that's working with a team in India or somewhere else, I know there's a lot of extra considerations. What advice would you give to someone for how to build the relationship with that sort of subject matter experts where you have time differences and cultural expectations that are kind of at play?
Well, I say I'll take that first. I actually learned this not as a tech writer, but as I worked as a writing consultant at the University of Central Florida Writing Center, and I don't know how I got this reputation, but I became the person that the majority of people I worked with were, excuse me, I'm trying to think like phrases. English was their second language, basically. So I had people from all around the world, and that became my thing. And so I met people. I mean, I worked with people from pretty much every single continent, except Antarctica. In my job there, and it was definitely very interesting to me to see the difference, especially being female, and dealing with guys who, and not even just guys, but like people who don't like writing in general, or people who are like, this is not my first language, and being very frustrated by, I know what I want to say. Like, I'm not an idiot, but I don't know how to say it in this way. It was very interesting to me, and I found a lot of that was kind of exploring, and once I started working with people, I'd be like, okay, what countries or like what nationalities am I most working with? And kind of took it on my own initiative to learn more about those cultures. And once I did, it became very easy. For example, I had a lot of Asian students, and the biggest struggle I saw was they don't use articles. They don't have a, the, and they don't exist in Chinese. So I had students who were like, I don't understand these. What are these things? We don't have them. And that would be a big struggle. So to kind of find ways to tweak it to be like, hey, understanding where they're coming from, and then kind of guide that to be like, this is where I'm coming from, made it a lot easier. And then also, especially gender roles, because especially now, all my students are male. Which is interesting. Fortunately, they've been really good about it. It's never really been a problem there, but I've run into difficulties being female in a very male-dominated work environment. I have run into a few. And I think sometimes just being very open and understanding where they're coming from, and once you can understand that, it can help bridge that gap. Because I found a lot of the people I've worked with, once I understood that, I understood they're not coming at it necessarily because they're anti-feminist or they're misogynist. It's not this. It's that was what they were raised with, And it's not fair to me to be treated that way, but it's not necessarily fair of me to expect you to be like, well, you should just throw away 20 years of your life and experience and act like, you know, someone who grows with my experience. That's not feasible either. So kind of finding a medium between it, and I found through that people are a lot more willing and open to learn. And sometimes if you come at it that way, where you're patient because you understand where they're coming from, but also not accepting it to be like, hey, I'll call you on your crap, but like, I'm also going to be more understanding about it, has been very effective, because I've had people who are much more open to changing, and to kind of, it has eased a few relationships because of that. Yes. It does work, Dan.
Let me add a little bit to that. The last decade of my career was spent in a company that was partly with Lockheed Martin, working with MBDA in Germany and Italy. And for much of that time, our only deliverable product was a technical review, and they were absolutely terrifying. It wasn't just a 1 or 2 day thing. It was generally most of a week, and that somebody was flying across the Atlantic to do this. In the United States, it wasn't so bad, because at least we got to work in the Eastern time zone. But if the review was to be held in Italy, I needed to get the entire review, multiple days, ready to be printed in that country, and generally, didn't have the time freedom. We had to back it up further. The bottom line to all this is that it's not just your problem. As the only deliverable in our company under that contract, it wasn't just me having a problem. Our management had a problem if these people did not come through. They would generally help by having pre-reviews and negotiating schedule. It was not just a communications activity. And so throughout my career, the lesson has always been, find out who hurts when the pain's distributed. It's not just you. If I fail, who really fails with me? And do they realize they're failing with me? And you engage them so that they don't have to feel the pain. It may be a proposal manager whose incentive compensation depends on having a successful proposal that actually gets submitted on time, or could be merely the difference in priorities within who you work with, this kind of thing. But if you don't get paid, for example, who has to do your work if they want to move you off the program, for example? In all cases, find your allies, bring them in. It works across the ocean as well as it works in country.
I feel like there were some copyrightable phrases in that answer.
Thanks, WC. That's helpful. Yeah, I think, Deborah, back when you and I were working together, we used to have some really interesting emails from our Indian colleagues with some phrases we weren't familiar with. And my favorite that I still see all the time is, please do the needful. So my motto is, always do the needful.
Yep. I got that. That's crazy. It's over the years, different jobs, you had to work with different people and different language, like you said, different cultures. And I have found it helpful to find someone. In most of the companies that I worked in, there was always someone from that area that worked with us. Whether they had a history, or they'd been there, or they were actually from that country, and do a lot of like, hey, can you help me understand what they're trying to say? So I would reach out to them sometimes and just find, ways to just say, okay, what do I need to understand? And it was very helpful, because there's certain things you can't say that you offend people. So yeah, in my history, you just there were certain things you couldn't say, could say, and it was helpful to find somebody that understood that culture.
The Europeans always were very courteous and asked if I really wanted to be called WC.
And you're like, yes, it does not mean that. We don't call it that. That's home.
I imagine in some of your careers, Google has been sometimes a big asset in finding those cultural differences as well. or any virtual service, not meaning Google specifically.
Recent, Amazon. In the latter half of the career. First half you didn't have it.
Do we have another question in the room or insights related to this question on the phone as well?
Either of our virtual panelists have anything else you guys want to add?
I went to a great seminar this back a couple years ago at FIU at the South Florida chapter when it existed, had a couple of UCF professors down, and they actually managed communication projects from around the world as their routine classes, and they were great, but they did explain that a lot of the root problems from cross-cultural communications had to do with synchronous versus asynchronous cultures, and they sort of in general said that the closer to the equator you were, the less time sensitive you were, meaning clock time. So they were saying Switzerland, famous for its clocks, is the most time-sensitive culture, and we lean in the United States more like that in general. But the closer you get to an equator, the less setting a clock time means to those people. And I did think that was a fascinating insight.
It does.
I will say from my experience in Jamaica, they have their own clock, they have their own time. They're just like, yeah, no worries. Like, it's just a real thing. Well, I was taught to be places 5 minutes earlier, you're late.
Yep.
Oh, no. Yeah, that was the best part, I think. Jamaica is very laid back, and it's very nice, and they're very, it's a whole cultural thing. It's just interesting.
You're trying to hold a meeting on time, right?
Good luck.
I had the same challenge working with the team in Brazil and Argentina. They were always a half an hour late. You had to plan your
So schedule a meeting.
You're telling them it's an hour earlier than the meeting is. You're like, oh, the meeting's not at 10, it's at 9:30. The meetings, we would have...
If you enforce their time to your time, they wouldn't show up at all. So, because you were insulting them.
We had a company that everyone was always notoriously late. Even local people were late. So if you were late, you had to buy the snacks, and you were made to buy the snacks to bring to the meeting, like whether it was donuts or bagels or whatever time it was to bring something, even if it was candy or something like that. If you walked in late, and the meetings had to end in 10 minutes before the hour, so people had time to get to the next meeting, so they were not late. So that's how rigid that place was. That you had to do it. Otherwise, no one would be there anywhere on time, whether it was remote, not remote, whatever on the meetings. They didn't enforce that. That was kind of interesting. But definitely, it's very interesting, especially like just different cultures and how they approach it.
And we had the issue on our joint venture company. Our management would fly over, like be in country, with time shift 6 hours later in Europe. By the time that they'd landed, got processed into the company, had some lunch, and anyway, for a late round of meetings. Here they'd come across, half the world to have this meeting. And at the end of the business day, 5 o'clock, whatever it was, the Italians would just get up and walk out.
Done. We're done.
Last call on questions. We got time for one more burning question about subject matter experts with our fantastic panel of 6 here this evening.
Can I give you a summary observation?
Certainly.
Can I draw my picture?
Oh my gosh.
The thing that hasn't come up yet, and at least I wanted to touch on, is that for us in football terms, we start pretty deep on our own territory. This is not natural for us. Very seldom do any of us have personalities big enough to fill a room. Otherwise, we would be in marketing. There's a reason we're in this role. And so it's going to be a little harder for us to achieve the success we want in working with people. I've always had kind of, as a result, a water on rock philosophy. The first time might not be real good, the second time might not be real good, but the process of building up credibility, consistency, reliability, and true admiration for each other in this case may take a while. Don't expect it to be an instant kind of a thing. You can help. The philosophy that I've always tried to explain was kind of a public utility approach to our business. You don't go to the water faucet and negotiate. You don't go to an electrical outlet and negotiate for electricity. In working with SMEs, they got tons of other problems. Just make sure you're not one. You're there to help.
Good summary. Dan, you really want to draw.
Oh my God.
So, if someone can make sure to turn our webcam, we do have our webcam on, by the way, toward one of the whiteboards, whichever one Dan is standing near. If you wanted to share one little last thing with us before my closing remark.
It's ironic since I'm the worst graphic artist in the history of the world. It's true. But this is pretty simple, and I do find engineers tend to like visuals, okay? And the issue, though, where my picture comes in, is something I'm surprised didn't come up, which is the SME sticker shock when they see their work completely obliterated with red ink and stuff like that, okay? So I've learned that before I do a thorough edit on an engineer, I usually do this thing with the picture, okay, to indicate the fact that, oh, let me draw the picture, I mean, I say, this line here is technical meaning. And of course, cardinal sin of any editor is to change the meaning, like the story I told earlier. You just don't want to do that. So one approach to that is what I'll draw the picture and say, now I could do this. I'll do you a WIMP edit. And that's a line like this. And I will never change any of your technical meaning, but I will change 6 to half a dozen, and I'll make sure the commas are where they need to be. And that is what I call, really, the non-value added, safe edit. Okay? Do you want that? Oh, no. Okay. Well, how about this? Okay, that's what I call a wild man, or wild person. And here I just do everything. I'll change it just to change it, and I make a total shambles out of your technical meaning. And if you want that? Well, sure as hell no. Well, here's the perfect content edit. You do all kinds of editing, and you never cross the line of changing technical meaning. I contend that's virtually impossible. So how do you achieve that good a product? You have to work together. You have to be a team. And so when I see, and I don't show all the format changes and spelling, all that crap, and track changes. I don't want it to look too bloody, right? But I will flag anything I'm not sure, or even if I've been real aggressive and rewritten a sentence, I want to be really sure that it's right. Because if I don't do that, this is what happens. Pretty darn good editor, but I'm not an engineer, right? There's going to be some areas where I change meaning, and that can be fatal in a proposal. So I say, you need to be my safety net. I cannot do, this is the value added edit. This is the one that makes it more concise, makes it more clear, makes it more compelling, sells the product, right? But to get something that good, I'm inevitably going to be pushing the limit on changing technical meaning. I say, so I can't do this. I'm going to have to move down toward, I'm not going to do that, but I have to move down towards this unless I can depend on you to my safety net. You know, I have to check stuff with you. There's no such thing as a stupid question. But the failure to ask a question can definitely result in a stupid edit. And depending on my relationship with the SME, I'll put comments next to it and say, I have no idea what this is. You know, and say, did I fix this or did I make it worse? Comments like that. Sure. The tone depends on your relationship with the SME. It's the first time with them, I'm going to be a little more conservative and respectful of that. One of my favorite expressions in the comment right on the side of the page is, please check Clarity Edit for technical accuracy. Now what that really means is you sounded, I had no idea what you were saying, and I tried to figure it out and express it in English. But you don't say that, obviously. Here's the wording there. Check clarity edit. It means you were unclear, you were stupid, but check clarity edit for technical accuracy. Don't let me screw you up. That's what I said with the thing before, where I know just enough to be dangerous. Done.
Please turn that back to center real quick, and we're just gonna close up here. So I have a ton of thanks to give here. For one, I'd like to thank David Coe and Riptide Software for hosting the in-person portion of this meeting. I'd like to thank our chapter president, Bethany Aguad, for being our online moderator.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight, be it in person here in the room or on the phone, and of course, all of our panelists both in the room and online. This was a historical first foray into a mixed media panel discussion, and I hope you all enjoyed it. And most importantly, please feel free to reach out to us with any observations, comments, or questions as follow-up. Our contact list is on our website. You can reach out to Bethany or I, Bethany being president at stc-orlando.org, myself being vice president at same. And by the way, Bethany did send out an email blast that links to a couple related Intercom articles, so any member of STC can click those links and view those for further reading. And I believe Dan had some notes that he prepared ahead of time that he'd like us to send out, so keep an eye out for those as well. Bethany, anything to add before we close up?
I was just going to add, if anyone on the phone wants to chat for a little bit after, I'll be here for another 10 or 15 minutes, so we can just, if you have any further questions about the chapter or about the topic, I'm happy to discuss a bit further. But otherwise, thank you all so much for coming, and thanks to all of our panelists, Emily, Dan, WC, Deborah, Tina, and Beth Ann. You guys were awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and please have a great evening, and see you next time.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.